I've been aware of Hellboy for a while, and while I wouldn't say I'm the biggest fan, I really loved the movies released in both 2004 and 2008, and I dabbled in some of the books, though they never caught me as much as I would have liked them to. So, when I heard about a new game being released in this universe and watching some of the gameplay, I was pretty optimistic. The art looked like it was ripped straight out of the comic's front pages, and the soundtrack sounded pretty good as well, at least from what they used in the trailer. So, while I won't over-explain everything in the game or use overcomplicated words that make me sound a lot more introspective than I actually am, I can tell you how this game feels, and what I would change if I had the chance. I do also want to preface this review by saying I'm experienced with playing things that are a lot more challenging than this game, so I didn't really have any issue with anything inside of the game. But that doesn't mean people that don't play these games often will have an easy time. In fact, getting used to the mechanics was one of the things I found the hardest, moving from other games similar to this. The gameplay of Hellboy: Web of Wyrd is pretty different to what I thought it would be in the trailers I saw. While yes, the combat is fun and it feels cool punching enemies till they evaporate, it's oddly slow and a little boring. They have a mechanic so that only one enemy can attack you at a single time unless you're in a certain situation, and that is super nice. Not having to worry about being backstabbed by enemies you can't see or swarmed by a bunch of ads that come out of nowhere, but it does make this game a little too easy. I just focus down the largest monsters and kill them before they have a chance to hit back. Don't get me wrong, it is so satisfying punching an enemy off a ledge and stunning them against a wall, but after you do it a few times, it really begins to lose its impact. I also became pretty frustrated at some points while fighting, mostly because there is an insane amount of move queuing and delay between actions. Sometimes I would try to block only for the enemy to hit me. Then, once I got up, Hellboy would decide to block, locking me in the position for just long enough to the enemy to hit me when Hellboy decides to stop blocking. The dodging also feels quite weird to get used to. Again, because of the move queuing, but because unlike FromSoft games, where dodging makes the enemy's attacks ignore you for a brief moment, this game actually relies on the player dodging out of the way of enemy movements. The visuals of Web of Wyrd are incredibly well made. Even though it's low poly and kind of simple, it doesn't feel like it's losing out on detail because of the cell shading. But that doesn't mean I'm a fan of it in motion. As I said before, every frame looks like it's taken straight from the pages of the Hellboy books, and while I love the art style on the pages, in the game it makes things feel muddy. While you can usually tell where the characters are in action, the lack of contrasting outlines on a character makes it really confusing when you're trying to figure out where you are or what you're doing in dark sections of the game, especially when enemies cast spells, or like in the hub section, there are massive shadows over everything. A large portion of the colors of this game also feels very desaturated. I get that it's supposed to express the dark tone of these planes that you're moving through, but the only thing that really stood out to me was the whites used in some of the effects. After an hour or so of playing, I started to get headaches, and I really needed to focus in on where I was from moment to moment. I really think that if the saturation was turned up just a small amount, it would improve this game's look drastically. Before we move on, I do have to admit that while at first I was a little opposed to it, the low frame rate look of the way the characters move really fits this art style, and for all the things that I think are an issue with this game, this isn't one. Before we get to the music, I just want to point out how satisfying all of the sound effects in this game are. While a lot of the sound effects are pretty generic, they've managed to make everyone hit just right. You can feel the punches. The way it snaps when your punches collide with enemies is just... Firing the guns and using relics has the same effect. And these sounds mixed with the music heighten the combat and make it so exciting, which is partially why I think this game falls so short. It's really satisfying in fights, if a little slow, and when the music's not active, it feels like the game's at a standstill. When outside of combat and trying to find your way around the maps, the soundtrack is nearly silent, outside of a few bass lines and some high-pitched stringed violins. Initially it made the exploration mysterious, like you're moving through a dangerous, unfamiliar space, but it does slowly lose its interest once you're stuck backtracking for minutes at a time because you went down the wrong path. This review may seem a little harsh, and I've pointed out a lot of issues with the game, some of which a lot of you would probably see as unimportant or not really a factor. But I think the main thing I want to point out about this game is it's just not for me. I think that the design and the game have some incredibly strong points, but the pace and presentation are off just enough that I really don't enjoy it. And while I don't necessarily enjoy this game from the team, I'm probably going to keep an eye on them in the future. What they've produced is incredibly well thought out and designed. It just doesn't really capture me, kind of like the rest of the Hellboy universe. So, thank you all so much for watching. Keep an eye out for more of these in the future, and I'll catch you in the next one.